Hello there, and welcome to Dream Past Diaries. I'm truly glad you've made it here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of dreamer who prefers to drift off to the sound of quiet thoughts and forgotten mysteries instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's story is yours to enjoy. You don't have to do anything now, just rest. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body grow lighter, as if gravity itself has begun to fade away.
In the quiet sweep of medieval fields, where long rows of wheat moved with the soft rhythm of the wind and farmers rose at the same hour every day for generations, the story of medieval bread begins as something slower, more patient, and more deeply interwoven with the land than anything most people recognize today. For the grain itself grew in soil that had rested through winters without chemical interruption, enriched by the gradual decay of fallen plants, by the remnants of animals grazing across open meadows, and by the steady cycles of rain and thaw that shaped the flavor and nutrition of each kernel. And because the communities that tended these fields lived closely with their harvests, observing tiny changes in the earth, the texture of the stalks, and the timing of the seasons, the bread that emerged from their labor became not only a daily food but a quiet accumulation of all the unhurried movement surrounding it, so that when grains were gathered, threshed by hand, sorted, by families who relied on sight and touch rather than machinery, and slowly ground on stone mills that preserved the bran and germ, the flour that resulted carried the subtle taste of minerals, the faint scent of the fields, and the rougher texture that made the bread dense and sustaining. And when baked in communal ovens warmed by wood or peat, the loaves developed a crust that reminded villagers of the heat of the hearth and an interior that stayed moist for many days, allowing people to eat the same loaf slowly, piece by piece, often dipping it in broth or soaking it to soften the sturdy crumb, which in turn made meals last longer and digestion slower, reflecting a way of life in which time unfolded gently, almost unnoticed, and every element of nourishment echoed the steady and repetitive rhythm of rural existence, creating a sense of connection between people, land, and bread that modern life, with its processed flour and accelerated schedules, rarely allows. The grinding of grain in medieval stone mills, often located near streams whose gentle flow powered wooden water wheels, produced flour that retained every fragment of the kernel, making the resulting bread dark, coarse, and dense, yet filled with slow-releasing nutrients that matched the measured pace of daily life. And because the milling process itself unfolded so gradually, with villagers bringing baskets of grain, waiting their turn, exchanging quiet discussions about the weather and pasture conditions, and listening to the repetitive creaking of the wheel as it turned with unchanging patience, their food seemed shaped as much by the mill's rhythm as by the grain itself. And once the flour was returned home, it was kept in woven sacks stored along cool walls, sometimes near herbs or dried flowers, which subtly influenced the aroma. And while modern milling techniques remove the bran and germ to increase shelf life, the medieval approach left everything intact, resulting in darker bread that required thorough chewing, allowing meals to stretch across long, calm moments in the day. And because yeast cultures developed slowly from the air or from a previous batch saved in clay jars, fermentation proceeded at a pace that reflected the environment, cool in winter, warmer in summer, so that the dough rose with the natural hours, never rushed. And when farmers or homemakers shaped the loaves, they used their hands as guides, feeling the roughness, the moisture, and small irregularities that made each loaf unique. And once placed into deep ovens whose stone walls radiated heat that had been absorbed gradually, the bread baked in a way that encouraged long-lasting nourishment and stability, forming a connection between the people and the slow-moving natural forces surrounding them, in deep contrast to the rapid, mechanized processes that create the uniform, airy loaves of the present day. In medieval homes, where kitchens were simple spaces warmed by hearths that glowed with embers throughout the day, bread making became a quiet routine repeated week after week, season after season, with each step unfolding in gradual motions that matched the muted rhythms of rural life. And women often began by sifting the coarse flour using woven sieves, letting the heavier particles fall slowly, listening to the soft hiss of grain passing through, a sound that became a gentle background to domestic life. And when they added water drawn from wells that reflected the coolness of underground springs, the resulting mixture became thick, sticky, and resilient, requiring steady kneading that encouraged contemplation more than labor, for the kneading itself, with its repeated pressing and folding, was a calming, almost meditative task performed beside open windows that let in the scent of earth and the distant calls of livestock. And as the dough rested, covered by cloth woven from local flax, families carried on with their slow tasks, tending animals or repairing tools, until the dough finally rose enough to be shaped. And when the time came to bake, the communal oven, often shared among several households, was heated gradually with bundles of wood collected over the previous days, and neighbors gathered, waiting their turn, discussing simple matters, exchanging small observations about the grain yield or the quality of last season's harvest, creating moments of social stillness centered around the unhurried cycle of bread. And because the bread emerged from the oven dense and aromatic, filled with the flavor of the fields and the warmth of the fire, it sustained people through long hours of work, slowly releasing energy in a way that complemented the physical demands of medieval life, offering not only nourishment but also a sense of grounded continuity that linked generation to generation. Medieval bread, though often simple and made of just grain, water, and salt, existed in countless regional variations shaped by the land, climate, and local customs. And because communities relied on the crops that grew closest to them, bread from northern regions tended to be darker and heavier, made from rye or barley that thrived in cooler climates, while bread from southern regions was lighter, sometimes made from wheat that grew in sunnier fields. And each type of bread carried the history of its place, with each loaf tasting subtly of the environment. Salty winds near coastal villages, earthy depth in inland farms, or faint floral hints in areas where wild herbs grew freely. And because ovens varied in design, from dome-shaped clay structures to stone-lined hearths, the texture of the crust differed from one village to the next, forming a patchwork of culinary traditions that reflected the diverse rhythms of medieval life. And in many homes, bread was not merely food but a quiet record of the seasons, with different grains used depending on the harvest, creating a sense of continuity between years as families compared the flavor of each season's bread to the last, noting changes in rain, soil, and sunlight. And while today's bread often tastes uniform across regions and stores, medieval bread carried the personality of its surroundings so fully that people could often guess the origin of a loaf by aroma alone, making the act of eating bread a slow, sensory connection to the land itself. And because meals were unhurried, often eaten at rustic wooden tables worn smooth by generations, bread became the anchor of conversation, work, and rest, accompanying soups, broths, and simple spreads, forming the core of daily sustenance in a world where food emerged directly from the ground that people walked upon every day. When historians describe medieval bread as a superfood, they often refer to the remarkable combination of whole grain nutrients, natural fermentation, and slow digestion that supported people who worked from sunrise to sunset. For the presence of bran and germ in the flour provided essential vitamins, minerals, and fibers that modern processed flour removes. And because medieval people ate bread that had been fermented through long, natural rising periods, the resulting loaves were easier on the stomach, allowing the body to absorb nutrients gradually rather than in the rapid spikes caused by modern refined bread. And this slow digestion harmonized with the pace of medieval life, where meals were often spaced far apart and energy needed to last through hours of steady physical work. And the presence of wild yeasts and beneficial bacteria in sourdough-like starters contributed to gut health in ways people of that time did not fully understand but instinctively trusted. And because their diets lacked the excessive sugars and additives of modern foods, bread remained a stable, grounding source of nourishment, providing not only calories but also a sense of comfort and familiarity in a world shaped by the cycles of nature. And when comparing this to modern bread, often made from stripped flour, fast-rising agents, emulsifiers, and preservatives, the difference becomes not just nutritional but cultural, with medieval bread representing slowness, patience, and connection, while modern bread often reflects convenience, speed, and uniformity, creating a contrast that illuminates how dramatically the rhythm of human life has changed, even though bread remains a daily presence in both eras. The social meaning of bread in medieval communities extended far beyond nourishment, becoming a symbol of stability, trust, and shared labor, for villagers relied on one another to cultivate fields, repair mills, and maintain communal ovens. And because bread was central to daily meals, it naturally became tied to customs, religious observances, and social gatherings, with certain loaves baked for weddings, harvest festivals, and holy days, each carrying subtle differences in shape, ingredients, or markings. And these traditions, repeated across generations, created a soft continuity in the lives of people who experience change primarily through seasons rather than technological shifts. And within households, bread also shaped the rhythm of the day, as the preparation, rising, baking, and cooling aligned with other domestic tasks, forming a predictable structure that brought calm even during difficult years of poor harvest or illness. And in many villages, bread acted as a quiet form of generosity, with families offering slices to travelers, workers, or neighbors in need, continuing a long-standing tradition in which sharing bread symbolized peace and goodwill. And because bread was also used in religious rituals, especially in Christian communities where it represented spiritual nourishment, its presence in medieval life merged the physical and the sacred, reinforcing the idea that simple, everyday foods carried profound meaning. and when seen from the perspective of modern life, where food is often hurried, packaged, and consumed without ceremony, the medieval relationship with bread appears deeply intimate, reminding us of a time when nourishment, community, and spirituality were woven together through small, repetitive acts. The gradual decline of traditional bread-making practices began long after the medieval period, when technological advancements introduced metal roller mills that separated the grain into components, creating whiter flour that many associated with refinement and purity. And as urban populations grew, the demand for bread that stayed soft for longer led to the introduction of chemical additives, preservatives, and faster fermentation agents, fundamentally altering the texture, digestibility, and nutritional profile of the bread people consumed. And with these changes came a gradual distancing between people and the land that once defined their daily food, for flour began to travel long distances, losing its connection to local harvests, and bread became an industrial product rather than a household creation, with uniform loaves replacing the distinct regional variations that once told a story of soil, weather, and culture, and the slow, grounding rhythm of baking, kneading by hand, waiting for natural fermentation, sharing ovens, and traditions, gave way to rapid processes that prioritized efficiency, reducing bread from a communal, sensory experience to a convenient, predictable commodity. And although modern bread offers accessibility and variety, many people experience digestive discomfort or nutritional gaps that contrast sharply with the steady nourishment medieval bread provided, revealing the extent to which the transformation of grain, flour, and baking practices mirrors the broader acceleration of modern life, in which speed often replaces depth and connection. And remembering the older methods reminds us of how much the texture of daily living once revolved around patience, slowness, and an understanding of food as part of a larger, unhurried natural world. Today, as people reflect on the contrast between medieval bread and modern varieties, there is a growing interest in returning to older methods that emphasize whole grains, natural fermentation, and slow preparation, not out of nostalgia alone, but from an awareness that the deliberate pace of traditional baking brings physical, emotional, and even psychological comfort, and in an age defined by constant motion, digital noise, and rapidly shifting routines, the act of mixing flour and water, feeling the dough take shape, and waiting for it to rise becomes a small anchor of calm, echoing the patience that surrounded bread making for centuries. And modern bakers who experiment with ancient grains, stone-ground flours, and long fermentation often discover flavors and textures that feel strangely familiar, as if reaching backward through history to a quieter era where food was shaped more by natural processes than by industrial precision. And this resurgence, though modest, suggests a desire to reconnect with the land, the seasons, and the sensory experience of nourishment, reminding us that the story of bread is not just technological or agricultural but deeply human, reflecting the way people interact with time itself. And while modern bread may never fully resemble its medieval counterpart, the act of remembering how bread once formed the foundation of daily life can bring a sense of grounding, slow reflection, and gentle appreciation for the simple rituals that sustained people for generations, allowing us, in some small way, to rediscover the quiet, steady rhythms that medieval families once knew so well.